Now our characters are finally ready to start working inside Unreal Engine 4. In this video I'm going to explain how to apply the cloth simulation to your character and why I didn't choose this method to this specific character. Each case is a special case, and if your character is fit to work with this kind of simulation, it might just do the job really well. The more options you have to apply your simulations, the better. So let's get to it. Now, before we deal with the character itself, let's take a look at how the cloth simulation would work in a simple object such as a flag. As you are about to see, the cloth simulation works really well with this kind of object, and that's because their complexity is fairly low. There just isn't much that the flag can collide to, and therefore, the possibility of the simulation run smoothly will increase substantially. If there isn't any kind of programming in regards to the simulation, well, the only thing that the same simulation will be colliding to is to the physics asset of your own model. To give a fairly rough explanation about the physics asset, it's composed by a bunch of geometric shapes that are responsible for the collision of your model and, in this case, the simulation. You can always adjust the shapes of the physics asset by entering the tab and then adding a capsule or a cube, any kind of geometric shape that you want, basically. And once you are done with these basic shapes, it will be applied to the whole physics of the mesh. And if you click on play right now, you will see that the simulation is already applied inside the world. Well, if you move the mesh and try to rotate it, it will be automatically changing how the simulation will be behaving. This is a really fun process to be working with, and honestly, if you give some thought and, well, if you play enough with all the variables that compose the cloth simulation, you will see that this feature is really helpful to make your whole scenario be more realistic, more fun, and more entertaining to everyone that's working with it. If you have any kind of question regarding this subject, try to contact me and we will be more than willing to help you all, okay? So, now it's time to start the simulation with our own character. Open the skeletal mesh and then right-click the section that you want the simulation to be applied to. Click on Generate Clothing Data from section and then click on Create. By doing so, you will be able to see the clothing data that you just created at the Clothing tab. Since the hair of my character is composed by two materials, I'm going to have to set up two different clothing data. Now right-click the section again and click on Apply Clothing Data. Don't forget to apply the same data that you just created for each section, so the clothing data will be applied in a correct way. Now it's time to deal with the manual part of clothing simulation. Click on Activate Cloth Paint at the top corner. You will see that a giant circle will appear. That is your brush for the clothing simulation. So, since this brush appears to be a lot bigger than the hair itself, let's scale it down and try to do the painting as smoothly as I possibly can. And if by any chance the view is obstructed by other parts of your mesh, you can always choose to isolate this specific section. And now, back to the clothing tab, you will see at the left corner there is a lot of settings that you might have to do to adjust your brush to your needs. The names are pretty much self-explanatory. We got the tools, the paint value, the radius, the strength, fall off, pretty much everything that we already saw at the rigging part. And in the same way as the skinning process, you gotta do it by hand, so it might take some time to get it right, okay? So don't rush it and try to be as smooth as you can so the flow of the simulation gets a nice result. What I'm going to do is basically to start with 100% influence, and then at the radius of 5 I'm going to paint only the tip of the hair. And then as I go upwards, I will scale down the strength of this same brush. The value of the paint that we are going to be starting is completely up to you. In this case, I'm starting with 100% and then scale it down to 75, 50 and so on. You can just choose it to start with 75 and go downwards from there. And also, while you paint the hair, try to be as even as possible. When you use one paint value, try to use the same height to all the strands. In that way, you will be sure that the simulation will be working smoothly. In my specific case, and only in my specific case, the hair simulation won't work, and later on I'm going to show you why. But if your character does have support for this kind of simulation, try to do this method and I think you will be just fine. Now, since I'm pretty much done with the 100% influence, I'm going to scale it down to 75 and then paint another height of the hair. Looks like I'm done. Now let's scale it down again to 50 and continue the painting. Let's scale it down again to 25 and we are pretty much done. Don't forget to leave the root with 0 influence, because that way your hair will be attached to the character. If by any chance you paint the whole hair strand, the strand will just fall off and act like a loose piece of cloth. Okay, so looks like we are pretty much done by now. Now it's time to smooth all the edges that we just painted, and well, you can do it both by hand using the brush or clicking on the button called Smooth Mesh. This way we will smooth everything that you painted till now. And also be careful to not press the Smooth Mesh button too many times, because well, if the root has any value beyond 0, it will fall off like a loose piece of cloth. And now, since you are pretty much done with the painting, once you click the Activate Cloth Painting, the simulation will start working and you will see how the simulation is working inside the section that you just selected. As I just said before, my hair is composed by two separated materials and therefore I need to do two sets of painting. So now it's time to do this very same process to the other material and the other section, and well, after that we are pretty much done and only left with some tweaks to do. As you are about to see, I'm going to use this very same method. I'm going to start with 100% and then scale it down till I get some values such as 25 or even 10%. Just don't forget to smooth it out after you're done with the painting, because it will have some nasty and sharp bending, the complete opposite of how the hair should behave. Try to paint all the pink spots over where the clothing should be to prevent any kind of simulation bugs. Rotate the mesh if necessary, and if you are by any chance seeing anything pink, it's most likely that you forgot some spot. Now I'm going to scale down the paint value to 75. Let's scale it down to 50 and continue the painting. Looks like we're pretty much done now. I'm going to scale down again to 25 and then change to the smooth brush and repeat the process that we just made in the another section. Since this one is really cleaner than the last that we just made, I'm going to just select the smooth mesh button about 4 or 3 times. And with it we are pretty much done. You will see how the simulation will be working with the hair, and since my hair is not really made for this kind of simulation, it will look pretty awful, to be honest. If by any chance you want to use this kind of simulation, you gotta prepare your character for it. If you are trying to achieve a ponytail look such as this character, you might have to do some extra compensating over the ponytail mesh. You gotta add a lot more of hair strands to make it more believable. The hair strands must be a lot thinner and more numerous. When you're dealing with hair simulation, there is a lot of clipping involved, and your job as the character modeler is just to hide this from being seen at the naked eye. And since there are 2 materials applied to the hair itself, there will be a lot of noticeable clipping going on. Another issue that you might have noticed is that the hair has 2 chunks behaving differently, and that's mostly because the painting was done by hand. It's virtually impossible to set up both meshes at the same height and the same values to basically has the same influence over that whole area. And therefore, to prevent this kind of bug, I do recommend you to have one single material for the whole hair. Now, since we are using the same material for both sections, the looks are a little bit better, but nonetheless not really what I want. So in the next video I'm going to set up the hair by physics and use a whole different method to approach clothing and hair simulation. Once again, feel free to ask me any question that you might have. Now, as a kind of overview of this kind of simulation, keep notice that it is really good to work with simple mesh such as a flag, but is not really suitable for things like this kind of hair. We don't have really much control over their strands, and therefore there is a lot of bad clipping going on. If you want to make this kind of simulation work in your character, you have to prepare your character for it, and therefore there is not really much I can show you, because each character has its own limits and its own looks on how the simulation should be applied. Try it out, see if the simulation works, but do the bone things that we set up on the hair just in case, so you can opt to use the physics simulation instead. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you on the next one.